Hey, everybody, welcome to today's episode of The Suspense is Killing Me. As always, I'm your host, Lucas Marino, and today we have another repeat offender. I think this is time number 3, Mike. Mike Allen. Is it number 2? This is number 3.
I believe it's number 2.
I don't know anymore, man. I'm
Well,
losing it.
if it is number 3, I'm great with that too, man. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it is number 1 or number 2 because we did Slow Burn.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to double check on my thoughts. My brain's a scrambled mess.
Well,
But today,
so this will be fun.
yeah, we're getting together today to talk about a very special book. Wow, the Black Fire
Oh,
Concerto. Oh, and
I
what a
love
little, yeah, it's so
yes.
pretty. And we've got a cool story behind all this. Not only a cool story, but a cool story behind a cool story. And I can't wait for everyone to learn more about this. This is, I think, maybe the first true dark fantasy book we've had on the show. Although there's plenty of horror elements in it, um, it's definitely, at least in my personal opinion, you can tell me, you're the guy who wrote it. If you wrote it to be more dark fiction or dark fantasy, sorry, but
That's
it's
a funny
beautiful.
story. Well, lots of funny stories, but so I suppose I did not necessarily think of it when I wrote it as a flat out and out horror novel.
Hmm.
As you just mentioned, horror elements in the Black Fire Concerto are pretty darn strong.
Yeah.
um,
Yep.
Lots and lots and lots of undead, lots of dismembered undead recombined to make new monsters.
Yes.
That's kind of a recurring theme in the world of the Black Fire Concerto. Necromancers like to mix and match their ghouls and zombies and create new things for nefarious purposes. Um, but the model for the Black Fire Concerto, kind of at its heart, would be classic sword and sorcery stories
Right.
like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser or the Elric saga, and I have to acknowledge this debt, the Gunslinger by Stephen King, which is uh, you know, I view that as kind of an updated sword and sorcery aesthetic, kind of the wild things that happen in those books with Roland wandering the world with his companions, kind of a classic sword and sorcery
Sure.
thing. You have kind of like the tragic main hero and then the pluckier sidekick. Uh, and I definitely have that uh, going in the Black Fire Concerto. Uh, my heroine Olyssa, who is kind of the driver of the plot, I guess I would, if I'm going to
Yes.
get technical, that is her role. Uh, she's a very she's a very strange individual with a really dark past who often does really brutal things in in the process of what in her mind is doing the right thing.
Right.
And so it's fun to have a character like that, I have to say.
Well, she
uh,
she portrays a good motivation.
yes,
Right.
yes, but before she exterminates everyone in the room because one of them said the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But the narrator, or the point of view character, I should really say. This isn't first person or
Right.
second person. This is a third person novel, told from the point of view of a young teenager named Urzel. And Urzel begins the book in a really, really horrible predicament, and
Yeah.
is sprung from that predicament by Olyssa through a series of a series of fortuitous and violent events, and she becomes she becomes Olyssa's apprentice, both learning music magic, excuse me, learning magic. Urzel and Alyssa are both musicians. Urzel plays the harp, and Alyssa plays a pipe that is a essentially a unique object that exists nowhere else in the universe, and it
Right.
was made especially for her. And it has all kinds of wild and unpredictable properties, including ways in which it can be used as a weapon. And um, and as as Urzel becomes apprenticed to Olyssa, their adventures continue in a manner that allowed me as a writer to share with readers more and more about the nature of this really terrifying world they live in.
Mm.
Uh, and uh, it's it was a lot of fun to be able to do my own kind of update of the sword and sorcery formula. I call it sidearms in sorcery, the way this particular book works. And but it also gave me an opportunity to kind of bring in my love of horror stories and horror movies. So I began with this idea to have my own version of a sword and sorcery duo.
Mm.
And because I tend to try and do things in the weirdest way possible, this is a pretty weird sword and sorcery duo. But the origin of the story combines that desire with a nightmare shared with me by during the days when I was regularly participating in an in a kind of improv theater venue here in Roanoke. Uh, it, we had, and I guess it still exists. It's just in a different format from what it was. We had a late night kind of live theater entertainment called No Shame Theater, and the idea was that anyone could come in, sign up, pay a small fee, and perform any kind of art whatsoever that did not break the law or break the rules of the venue. And so this is somebody I knew through that, and he shared a nightmare with me about a restaurant that served zombie meat.
Mm.
And the restaurant would lure tourists into the property. The tourists would be the tourists would be made into zombies, and then become part of the menu. And that that idea became uh, if you read the opening couple of chapters, it'll be very obvious what I ended up kind of doing with that idea. But it it blossomed into kind of an essential part of the darkness of this world, which is that in this world, zombies called ghouls in the book. I don't. The
Mhm.
word zombie never actually appears. They're always called ghouls. And
Mhm.
ghouls, they are created by things like bites, as happens with movie zombies. But what happens when you're bitten is a magical curse is passed on. It's not a disease.
Mm.
And so these undead are created via magical curse, and you can shoot them or stab them as many times as you want to, and it has absolutely no effect. Um, However, this occult has grown up in this world overrun, which is that perhaps it is possible to obtain immortality by eating the flesh of the ghoul. Kind of a little role reversal there. And there are there are ghoul eater cults, all over this land, and my heroines are foes of the ghoul eater cults. So that's maybe sort of a general statement of what they are facing as they wander on their adventures.
Now, what made you use so when the story opens, it opens on the Red Empress, which is
Yes.
this kind of like riverboat that does exactly what you're saying. It's this place where people are invited. Um, the tourists, for example, turn into ghouls, and then elite can consume.
Right. If you're
Right,
if you're wealthy enough to be an actual member, then you can eat,
right,
you can eat the results of the when the victims are changed into ghouls.
right. So, what gave you the idea to do it on a riverboat? Because it seems a little. It seemed it's a great place. It's a great setting for it. I just was like, oh, this is unique. It doesn't kind of have that same, when you think about worlds of sorcery and magic and this kind of like landscape, I would have not thought immediately of like a riverboat, but it fits so well.
I am glad that you noticed that. That's a great question because obviously I'm prepared to kind of talk about where the cult. I guess I'm gonna say the wrong words all through this. My apologies, everybody who's listening and
We're
watching.
just keeping them on their toes.
Sure. Uh, you know, I can remember the origins of the cult, but I cannot specifically remember why I chose a riverboat. I think it had to do maybe with sort of just the environment
Mm.
I pictured this taking place in.
Mm.
Uh,
It's very
and
isolated because of that.
yeah, yeah, and it's not, um, it's not. It's very difficult to escape from, obviously,
Right.
the way they have fortified it, and perhaps that becomes a problem for the cult themselves once they've invited the wrong person inside.
Right.
Uh, which um, I don't think it's very spoilerific to talk about this part because really
Yeah.
this is just the very very beginning of what happened.
Sure.
Um, and I guess I guess just my instinct for nightmare
Mm.
felt like a riverboat was right.
Yeah.
For the setting that we introduced these people in. Maybe part of it also, when we first meet Erzelle, she is a prisoner of this cult,
Mm.
and because essentially she's still too young for for her to be of value as a member of the undead. She is forced to perform during these dinners where others who have been afflicted with the ghoul curse are consumed. And so I think I think maybe part of that, the idea of having to perform on a stage, maybe my mind associated that with, like, boats, cruises. And so this is a very nightmarish version of that,
Yeah.
to begin with, for poor Urzell.
Yeah, it works out great. I mean, she's basically, like you said, she's kinda like a performer on a cruise ship, like,
Right,
from hell, and it's like, um, she's kind of taken back when she sees well, she is very much taken back when she first sees Alyssa,
right,
like, "What is this beautiful woman doing here?" You're like, you know,
right.
"Why does she not look like she understands she's in danger?" It's like this kind of unique experience and like you said, I don't want to spoil it, but this is where they become paired up and
Yes,
they kind of
yes,
share a unique experience, like you said, bonded by violence.
yes.
And and then it's off to the races from there. And what I love about this book, I took a few times where I started reading out loud to my poor wife is sitting on the couch trying to mind her own business. And
Bless
I'm
you.
like, yeah, I'm like, wait, you got to hear this. And I'm reading. parts of your scenes to her because the prose is so rich and intentional and beautiful. It's like very, very much fits right in the pocket of this kind of like dark, like almost like a dark fairy tale at times, the way the prose is laid out.
That's a
Um,
great description.
yeah, I love that.
Good.
You know, I've kind of as a person who really enjoys like classic lit and other just really rich like poetry and things like that. I found this to be like very much like an enjoyable read for the prose alone.
Thank you.
Yeah, just outside of the story. So if you're looking for like a conventional, nondescript, kind of straightforward story, go somewhere else. This is
Right.
for the lovers of beautiful words, a beautifully unique story, but also horrible. I mean, and you talked about having horror like wound through this thing. It's in every corner of this book. Like there
Yeah,
isn't
yeah, it is.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's not a scene or a place without it. It's everywhere in this book. So the reason I bring that up is because the cover to me was very much like dark, kind of like a dark. I mean, if I had to put this on a shelf somewhere in Barnes and
I'll
Noble, it's
hold my
probably
own copy, we can mirror each
yeah,
other.
it's probably going to be like a dark fantasy type.
Right.
But this dude with all the antlers, the way you describe him for the first time, which I think is roughly at the 30% mark in the book. If I can just
I think that's about right. I think that's when he first the antlered man makes
yeah,
his
I
first
mean, oh
appearance.
my god. I was like, this is nightmare fuel.
Yeah, it's actually it's interesting, you know, Jennifer Robota's Lesser beautiful her beautiful cover,
Hmm.
you know, I think is amazing in terms of portraying these characters and kind of capturing aspects of the mood of the book.
Right.
Maybe this is more toward the beautiful side of the darkness than perhaps the gruesome side of the darkness, obviously. You know, but which I certainly appreciate. But something that you are correct about is that sinister as the antlered man looks on this cover, uh, when he is a much more terrifying entity as described in the book. I guess
I
maybe that's what I can say.
yeah, I was reading that and I was like, what? It's like this. And it took me a moment because I didn't at the time that I came across that in the story, I wasn't necessarily thinking about the cover at all. And then I'm like, closed the book after I was reading, that session. I looked down and I'm like, yeah, like this is some very kind treatment of the thing I just read about. Like
Right.
all of his little ornaments, if you will.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just I mean, just brutal. So that was pretty intense. And then there's a scene where Urzel and Alyssa go into this very forbidden location, an unexplored, unknown kind of like forbidden place.
Yes.
And I love that you took this magic that they have and you used it to their benefit until they got to the most dangerous place they possibly could. And then everything goes sideways.
Yeah. That's a
So
great that is a great you know, sideways and down.
downward, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're reading this thing and you don't I mean, it to me it read like a fantasy horror book.
Well,
Um,
great.
so yeah. So I mean, but like we were talking about, it's kind of hard to you don't see that a lot. I guess you just don't see um, a lot of people that really infuse the two genres that strongly. Even to your point, like King's Dark Tower series to me, even though he's very clearly a horror writer, he also writes sci-fi and fantasy and all the
Sure.
things. But his Dark Tower series didn't feel as ingrained in like base horror as this does to me. So
Cool. I mean,
yeah, so take that,
that's
Stephen
cool as
King.
far as I'm concerned, but yeah, I mean, I do want it to be scary, uh,
Yeah,
and you know, hopefully at least some of it is. But there's what passes for playfulness for me, and you know, I don't if you know, I guess you've read some of my short stories. You know, they
Right.
can get pretty bloody twisted.
Oh, yeah, you get pretty wild, so
Yeah. Uh, it passes for playful for me when I'm writing, especially writing these books, the Black Fire Concerto and its sequel, which maybe we'll get to talk about some.
yeah.
That's still that's been turned into the publisher and it's been announced. It's called the Ghoul Maker's Aria, and it continues the adventures of my two heroines. And uh, the for me, getting playful is kind of like how utterly bonkers can I make this? and,
Well,
uh,
you do it in so many different ways.
yeah. And there's a part of me, I'm not sure that a reader would necessarily pick up on this, especially in the second of the Black Fire. They're one of the motivations through from I'd say from about the midpoint of the book to the very end, uh, was kind of thinking to myself, you know, how far can I push this? How much can I get away with and still have this click together in what seems like a logical way.
Mm. Yeah.
And my inspiration for that, I kind of I mentioned the sword and sorcery folks either earlier, but you know, a lot of the inspiration for this book, especially, came from my experience as a youngin reading, say, the Amber Chronicles by Losney, or the to some degree the Thomas Covenant books by Stephen R. Donaldson.
Mm.
Some the second trilogy of the Thomas Covenant series, if you ever read that, has just some wild off the wall stuff that
Mm.
happens, major plot points. Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun. You know, I'm not trying to compare myself to that jaw-dropping masterpiece, but kind of the sort of the surrealism and the surrealism and the sense that reality can kind of shift under your feet, and yet, there's still a controlling logic to the story.
Mm.
There are those are kind of things that were those are kind of things that were driving me when I first wrote this book and came up with that particular plot. In addition to movies like you know the horror elements come from, I guess, kind of taking some of the things I admired, as a immature teen in movies like Return of the Living Dead or
Yeah.
Reanimator and Bride of Reanimator, even, in kind of taking some of the things that happened in those movies and going, okay, how far can I go with this? Uh, so I'm glad that you had such a great experience with this very strange book.
Well, I tend to like, I was a child of the 80s, and I like to say I was a child of the 80s and a teen of the 90s. So I got the good smattering of all the dark fantasy, weird stuff that was just for some reason, and gratefully, it had its moment that during those times, which, by the way, I want to go on the record as saying the bride of anything is almost better than the original every time.
Right,
It's just like when you saw the bride of, like, in the late 80s, early 90s, you knew you were in for it. It was either going to be
right, right,
it
right.
was going to be great. But to the point, like, if I took this book back then and set it in front of a crowd of people that had been exposed to the never ending story and legend and, the Dark Crystal, like all these just kind of weird, dark
Sure.
stories that we had, this would have fit, like, it would have been adjacent to a lot of that type of, I guess, like those types of stories, but in a very different way. This
It'd have
was,
to be R-rated.
yeah. And I think that, like, yeah, this would not have been, the PG-13 story of,
I'm very flattered by that. I mean, I would that list that
yeah.
you just rattled off, I would throw Return to Oz in
Oh,
there.
I love it. That's like one of my all-time favorite movies from my childhood.
It's a great movie.
It's fantastic. I mean, the tension when they're in the antique place trying to choose the items. Oh,
Is that a different place?
and they have to pick the three items.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
oh
Oh,
my god.
yes. Oh,
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a very tense
Yeah, I
scene.
was like on the edge of my seat for like it felt like forever. It was probably 10 minutes.
So sorry, the first scene that came to my mind was the scene with the scene in the witch's castle where, Dorothy goes all the witches' different heads are
Yeah.
stored in alcoves on the wall.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah, I mean that's
I could probably work an homage to that into, if I get to write future stories in this world.
I love it. I love it. And I think the cool thing about this was because I'm, primarily a horror reader these days. I do love the integration of that with the fantasy because it gave me a bit of a palate refresher. It's like a little bit of a palate cleanser. And it also felt like natural and beautiful and terrifying all at the same time. And I think one of the cool things about that is like if I gave this to my niece, right, who's 18 years old,
Oh, okay. Yeah,
right?
no problem there as far as I'm concerned. Yes.
Yeah, like she would probably like fall in love with this because it's unique and it's got all the magic, but it's also got all the terror. And I think that's a really cool mix when it's done well, and you do it really well. And I think the interior formatting is fantastic. I think Todd Kiesling did that, right?
That's right.
Yeah, Todd Kiesling did that.
Right.
Um,
Design the title that kind of tangles into the antlers here. That was his doing
oh,
too.
that was Todd's as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, great job. I mean, really well formatted book. It's pretty, but it's clean and very professional. So shout out to Todd. And I also thought the use of so when Alyssa is speaking to Urzel in her mind without her mouth,
Yes.
like it's just by thought, it's all in italics like a thought, but it's also in bold, so you can tell that it's Alyssa. And I was like, oh, I love that. Like, because I've never thought about speaking through someone else's mind in bold italics as an interior designer before, but I do all of our interiors at Sobolo, and I thought, how come I've never thought about that?
Well, I suppose it is out there now if others want to pick it up.
Yeah.
So, not 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 to drag this, through like a 2 hour long tangent. I'll do my best. My very first novel that I ever wrote, it's really more of a novel-shaped object than a novel, if you get me. This was this was written as my master's thesis when I was in the creative writing program at Hollins University, here in Roanoke, Virginia, where I live. And it was a science fiction novel. I think anybody who braved trying to read it, maybe someday I will actually, whip it into something like readable shape. Right now, I would say it's not that, but it's very very heavily influenced by Shadowrun.
Hmm.
If you're familiar at all with that gaming
Yeah.
system, it kind of crosses cyberpunk with urban fantasy,
Hmm.
and the characters, a lot of the dialogue in that book happens in mind speech, telepathic communication. And I had in that manuscript a way of I came up with a punctuation for it that
Hmm.
designated what it was. And when I originally wrote the Black Fire Concerto, I did the same thing. And um, the Black Fire Concerto, I don't suppose this is a big secret. It was actually published previously
Mm,
by a very small, short-lived imprint called Haunted. That was a of John O'Neill's, the fellow who runs the Black Gate website. Which, speaking of crossing fantasy and horror, Black Gate, Blackgate had something of a penchant for that themselves. Blackgate began as a fiction magazine, a
mm.
slick fiction magazine, but it lives on now as this kind of fandom focused website. And uh, during that process, that first publication process, the designer then, uh, in consultation with John, decided to represent the mind speech as bold italic instead of using the punctuation that I came up with. And when I like, oh, that totally
It
worked.
totally works.
Yeah.
I
and
wouldn't
and
have thought
so
about it.
yeah. And so that uh and so that is me not trying to claim full credit for that innovation that I am nonetheless very proud of.
Well,
And
one of the cool things I like about it is it makes it sound just a little louder too,
right. Well,
you know?
because if you imagine, like, literally someone else's words are just sort of apparating inside your brain.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And my I think I've more than once in the books, that happens to somebody and they're like,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, and it also helps separate the individual's thought from the other person's, but it is so similar that it's easy to determine who's who, but it's also uh,
right.
easy to determine that it's a thought, an internal voice, but not yours, So I thought I was like, I like that. So thanks for the great formatting tip. I learned something
Well,
new every day.
I you're most welcome. I mean, feel free to use it if you find a way to use it.
Well, Mike, the thing that drives me a little batty about this is I've written two novels and a novella and a half, halfway through the third novel in the series for my Whispering House series, and there's tons of italic thought because it's a psychological haunting, and
Sure.
there's dreamscapes and atmospheric stuff happening, and so there's a lot of internal kind of like monologue and dialogue going on in these scenes, and I've never once had that tool at my disposal, and I wonder what I would have done.
Well, there's always future projects, but
Yeah. So after this series is over, I'm gonna have to recall this, whip this tool out of my toolbox because I think
wicked.
it was really nice. Also, another thing about the book is you allowed the story's pace to progress very naturally. Like I'm sensitive to things like section breaks and chapter lengths and things like that because of us living in these books all day and doing these things and writing them and publishing them and reading them and all the things. And so I often step back and say, well, let me just reduce my sensitivity just a bit and put myself in a more traditional reader's role. There's a pacing and a kind of a cadence that gets established in books. You don't force the story to match a cadence. You let the story be exactly what it is, and
Thank
the
you.
breaks happen where they should rather than where they're forced to occur. And so I thought that was really cool because you didn't like cut a scene just a little shorter to make it fit into this like arbitrary standard that is set early in the book, and the only person that would impact is the reader. And so I thought it was a really good that like I was like, oh wow, this one's just going to keep. Oh, the scene's getting out of control. Oh wait, we're still going, and it was like, we're not breaking, which is
So,
good.
some of that has to do with sort of the nutty circumstances under which it was originally written.
Nutty circumstance.
Yeah. So, um, Not to, although this is described, the process is described in my acknowledgments
Right.
and afterward at the end of the book, but uh, to again to try and keep it short. Um, Claire Cooney, C.S.E. Cooney, World Fantasy Award winning author, C.S.E. Cooney, was originally going to be the recruiting, it's acquisitions editor. That's the right word
There
for
you go.
this Haunted Stars imprint. And she approached me uh, about whether or not I might have a novel or novella that could be used for this line of books. And all that existed of the Black Fire Concerto at that time was the opening chapters set in the riverboat, and it was a standalone novelette at that point.
Hmm.
And I let her read it, asked her because I'd always wanted to. My idea was that novelette wasn't going to be the only thing Alyssa Nerzel ever did. I really wanted to write a series of stories,
Hmm.
and she read it and said, "Please make this into a novel." And so, and the details are a bit lost in the fog of time, but uh, I, in order to kind of make the timeline that was being discussed, I wrote that story at kind of a breakneck pace
Hmm.
that I don't think 55, 56, excuse me, I'm 56. I want to be 55 still. 56-year-old me could do that. But I cranked it and cranked it and cranked it out. And so some of that momentum that you're describing is like just how it came out. But uh so the book is being republished now by Ruidon Books, upstart new publisher. They're also the same. It comes out next month, April 22nd. They're also releasing a new anthology edited by Nick Mamadis,
Hmm.
120 Murders,
Oh,
uh,
that's great.
which which is an anthology. It's a themed anthology rooted in alternative music from the era of Gen X. I guess obviously Gen X still exists, but yes. Uh, and so that's also coming out next month. And uh, when when Ruidon chose the Black Fire Concerto as what would be their first novel that they would release. Obviously, edits were back on the table,
Right.
and so it gave me. I'm pleased. I'm really because it gave me a chance to even further refine that pace and those breaks, and so a lot of the chapter breaks that you presumably encountered as you read the book,
Yeah.
those weren't in the original version of the book.
Oh.
I mean, it was like a solid block. That just kept going and going and
Well,
going.
thank you for the breathers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I thought, I really, I want to kind of, I want to get some control over that.
Hmm.
And
Well, I'm sensitive to that, and I appreciate that. Partly because I Les and I edit all the books at Sobolo, and I'm always the final. Um, I do all the interior work, so I'm always the final read, uh, unless we're outsourcing another proofreader. And so I'm sensitive to the pacing and the breaks. And we just did Recall from Alan Baxter, which if you guys haven't checked it out, you got to go check this thing out because it's a super cool project. Anyways, all three novellas of his Eli Carver series put into one omnibus edition. And when I met with Alan about the book project, I said, "Hey, we're really interested in doing this with you." Um, and I put all of his files together in one book. I stepped back and said, "We have three different styles of pace, and we have 3 different styles of chapter heading, and we've got 3 different, because they were 3 different books written at 3 different times. And um, you know, you have to have breath, you have to have time, you have to be able to collect yourself, plan, and read all at the same time when you're a reader, even though you kind of subconsciously do those things. And so that particular project was
Absolutely.
114,000 words of that, of working through that and making it kind of
Wow.
consistent over 3 different pieces of art. And I think that was still like, and it's super nerd, like writer publisher stuff, but that was one of the proudest points in that book for me when we got done with it. I'm like, it looks great and it reads great. It's got those, you can catch your breath because there's a lot of action. Much like your book, it's a lot of action. Like your characters aren't laying around contemplating life in the woods. Like that's not happening
No,
here.
they're usually ending the lives of others in the
So
woods.
it's, you need to be able to breathe, and you need to be able to like put your feet down for a second and go, okay, can I what just happened, so anyway, very
Thank you.
nicely done.
Thank you. Yeah,
um Go ahead, sorry.
oh no, I was just gonna say, obviously this is way in the future now at this point, but the sequel, which was actually written, which was actually written back when the original version of the book was brought out, and I'm really glad it was because I'm really glad it was because it was all very fresh in my mind when I wrote that original draft. But the sequel has uh, I think of this because you were mentioning the action. The sequel sort of had a guiding principle that uh, if it's something that might appear on the cover of death metal album, then it's something that's going to happen in the book.
I like that.
Yeah. In fact, when I wrote the sequel, I mean, obviously, music is a factor. The Black Fire Concerto, the Ghoulmaker's aria. Music is very, very, a huge factor in what goes on in these books. Uh, when I wrote, I played the album "The Devil You Know" over and over and over again. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That is "The Devil You Know." The band is billed as Heaven and Hell.
I remember Heaven and Hell.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah,
actually Black. It's actually Black Sabbath.
yeah, pretty much.
It's Black Sabbath with it's
Ronnie
Black
James
Sabbath.
Dio.
Yeah, it's Black Sabbath with Dio singing and Vinny Appice on drums.
Right.
And that album it's really amazing, by the way, but it's very kind of it's kind of a sludgy
Yeah.
album.
Yeah.
And
I,
and
I mean, I remember when it came out, and I remember thinking, wait, isn't that Black Sabbath? But then I
yeah,
was like, wait, this is Black Sabbath 2.0, but now it's really Black Sabbath 3.0 because, the drummer, but it still has Geezer Butler, I think, on bass, and
yeah,
Tony Iommi, right?
Geezer and Tony
Yeah.
Iommi,
Yeah.
as
There you go.
so it's the same lineup that did the original
Gotcha.
album. If you with the songs that were the song that was used in the heavy metal movie. Uh,
Yeah. And then they did like a reunion tour,
they
and
did, and I actually
yeah.
saw them on that tour.
Did you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They were, and it was, it was great. It
I was
was.
gonna say, how did Ronnie sound on that tour?
I remember him singing live, basically sounding like he sounds on the albums. I mean,
What
just,
a
and he was
powerhouse.
older by then.
Yeah.
So that show, boy, this is a tangent, and yet it's not because I have a very heavy metal sensibility that I think.
It's part of the DNA of the show, so we're
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. So that was in 2008.
Hmm.
I saw them in Bristol, uh, and that was part of the Masters of Metal tour.
That's all right.
And so if you're familiar, that tour was Testament, Motorhead, Heaven and Hell, aka Black Sabbath, and Judas Priest.
Insane.
Yeah, oh my god, it was such a good show. You
It's
know,
crazy.
uh, um, so yeah, I use I use a lot of sort of classical music terms and references in these books, but because I'm really, a headbanger at heart, and the sensibility is very, very heavy metal,
Right,
perhaps,
right.
for sure. Um,
Oh, and I've gotta ask you a question.
sure.
On the cover, the skull.
Yes.
I don't
Yeah.
know if you wanna talk about that at all, but, like, I know what scene that comes from, I think.
So this is something I think it's okay to talk about this.
Right, okay.
So the original draft of this cut was much more specific to that scene that you're referencing, in
Mm,
which I'll go ahead and say it, and I guess people can wonder why it's happening.
fair.
Urzel in that scene is carrying a skull that has has had the top of the cranium chopped off, and in that skull is in that skull is a I guess you could say kind of a hand of glory,
Yes.
and the hand is on fire,
Yes,
and that is what she is using as a torch.
that's right.
There's a very, to my mind, very funny, but there's a very kind of sinister reason why she has that, particular object. The original draft of this cover portrayed that exactly as I described it. And I think, in further drafts, the figure of Urzel got smaller,
Mm,
and so so you can kind of imagine that the hand is probably still in there, but you can't see it
right.
like you could as it was originally done.
When I got to that scene in the book, I thought, "Uh-oh," and then it unfolds, and I'm like, "Where did Mike come up with this?"
That's one where I really don't know if I can say there's a lot of I don't this is another one of those. It's like, should I say this is an author? Well, what the hell? So I am quite a bit of the writing process with this book, because I mentioned it was really fast.
Mm.
It involved it involved kind of just what happens here, bang, what happens here, bang, what happens here, bang, and I
Mm.
kind of made it up as I went, and then in the redrafting process made it all make sense.
Mm.
If you've almost certainly done that yourself as a writer,
Oh, yeah.
where you come up with something and then you're like, okay, well, now I have to kind of retrofit this so it's
Mhm.
something that's actually possible, because I
Right,
want to keep it.
right.
And
Well, I thought it was, it felt natural. It didn't feel like, disjointed or not like, it didn't feel.
disjointed, eh?
Yeah. Yeah. Says the says the guy about the lady holding the skull
Yeah.
in the place full of bone. No, it was funny because I was like, it seemed very, fitting for the scene, and I just thought it was so creative. I'm like, "Where did he come up with this?" Like, "Hey, someone got a light?" And then it's like, "Yeah, I got you." It's like, and then, "Oh, that's the light? Okay." I was like because most of what I write isn't well, everything I've basically published is set in fairly contemporary scenes, so it's like, I mean, they're not as fantastical at, places as what you're writing about, and so
Sure.
there's less of the same type of magic at play. There's magic and there's weirdness and there's all that kind of stuff, but this is set in a totally different world, and it gives you so much reign and you have so much room to be creative. And so I thought, well, that was a really cool way because you could
Right.
have just grabbed a damn torch,
Right. Right.
but no.
Well, my thought was there wasn't one. on hand.
Right.
And so what would these creatures do?
On hand.
Yeah. You know,
Excellent.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I
Um,
thought that was really cool. That was one of those creative moments in the book where I was like, "Oh, no, okay, so there's, you know, to me, writers leave their fingerprints in their stories all over the place." And, and when I say that, I mean, like, you can tell when something's written by, it's a unique experience reading every author's work. And oftentimes I struggle with seeing that in some of the things I read or write because or not necessarily right, but in most of the things that I read that are a little bit more mainstream, I'm always looking for their fingerprint. I'm always looking for that unique artist's,
sure.
fingerprint in their work. Like, what sets this apart? Well, that's just one of those scenes that I couldn't. I mean, I probably would not have written that. And I was like, that is a really cool.
You're
It's
making me blush, man.
well, yeah. I mean, I probably, it was like I guess an opportunity to do something easy, and you didn't take the easy road out. You're like, oh no, this is an opportunity to do something cool, and you took it, and
Thank
it's great. So I saw that, and I went, oh, that's that's cool because it's a fairly common thing to go. It's dark. I need light, and then go get a source that. What are all the things that first come to mind when I need light?
you. Right, right.
Probably not that, and that's why I was like, this is a really cool way to kind of leave a trace of yourself in the story, like your creative touch that is very unique to you and your voice and your own fingerprints as a writer. So I thought that was really cool.
Thank you.
So, dude, tell me a little bit. Can we talk about? Okay, so let's back up for just a moment before I drag you into a sequel conversation for just a few minutes because I know we can't talk about that, but so much.
Right.
What's the release date for the re-release of the Black Fire Concerto?
Its release date is April 22nd.
April 22nd. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So not, only a month from now,
Yes.
which is just mind-boggling to me. I never thought, uh, this is maybe something like readers don't really care about this kind of thing, but if you're a writer and you hear me say I wasn't submitting this anyway,
Right.
and suddenly here it is on track to be re-released in this really kind of in this really kind of show-stopping way.
Right.
It's I'm still just flabbergasted that this is something that's happening, and I'm really grateful to the founder of Ruidon Books for choosing to do this. Um, so here in Roanoke on April 26th, I am going to be the featured author at the downtown Roanoke independent bookstore, Book No Further, as they celebrate Indie Bookstore Day.
That's
So,
awesome.
and so that's what I am doing. That is essentially my first launch event. Hopefully, there will be kind of other launch events through the year as you do. Just because you've had it in one place doesn't mean you can't have launches, any other places too.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and it will be available pretty much, you know. I mean, I can't guarantee you're going to be able to walk into a bookstore and find it, but you'll definitely be able to walk into a bookstore and order it.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's going to be, everywhere: Kobo, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop, IndieBound, iBooks, uh, Google Books. Google Play. You can find it already, pre-order it in all of those places. It's out there for the taking.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I was curious about that because I hadn't looked into your publication date just yet, and I wasn't sure if it was like like later this year or if it was coming up pretty soon. So I appreciate that.
Sure, very soon. Yes.
Yeah, April 22nd is right around the corner. And then what about tell me a little bit about what you can talk about with the sequel.
Sure. So the sequel, The Ghoul Maker's Aria, obviously continues the themes of both ghouls and music,
Hmm.
and it expands it expands the world further. I'll tell you, you're going to be the first person I've ever said this to, aside from my wife. To my mind, the world that Urzel and Alyssa travel through is a parallel Earth.
Okay.
It's not our Earth, but it's kind of close. Obviously, history diverged radically,
Yes.
several decades in the past when the
Yes.
apocalyptic magical storms arrived that
Yeah.
transformed some things and created the ghouls and et cetera, et cetera. And um, there are uh, there are new threats and old threats. Might be a good way to put it.
Nice.
And so you mentioned something that you appreciated. Let me see how well I can phrase this. Something that you appreciated in the Black Fire Concerto was a scene I wrote where kind of the worst possible thing happened at the worst possible moment. And a good deal of what happens in the immediate aftermath is trying to set things right, and in the course a whole lot of secrets come to light that you that are not happy secrets. I
Right.
guess you could say. And the ghoul makers the ghoul makers aria, um, I would say, has at least double the rug pulls.
Oh,
Maybe that's a safe way that I can put
nice.
it. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the plot twists and the
Yeah.
yeah, good deal. Well, that's really exciting because I think that keeps people on their toes when they're reading a sequel. My goal has always been if I'm writing a sequel or if I'm writing a trilogy and I'm book 3 or whatever, that it feels fresh and that there are surprises and all the suspense and everything is there in spades, if not in more, than when we first started. And so it sounds like, that I'm in for a ride on this next one. So that's good.
Oh, well, I certainly hope so. Now, of course, it's been turned in for edits, and so it's probably best that I not be too specific because,
Right.
I don't know what changes might be requested, as which is, a thing that happens in this process.
Eliminate all the rug pulls.
Yeah. Those I'm pretty sure they will wanna keep.
Yeah.
Something I should mention, I've done a pretty terrible job of emphasizing this part. So, yes, the book The Black Fire Concerto comes out April 22nd. Uh, if you pre-order the Black Fire Concerto through the Ruidon Books website. I believe that's just ruidonbooks.com. And Ruidon is spelled Ruadan.
See if I can get this to the camera.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes, well done.
I'm
Uh,
trying.
so, so if you pre-order the book directly through Ruidon, uh, you will receive as a free bonus, and you can read it right away, a short story written in the world of the Black Fire Concerto, called "The Thrill of It All." And so I tried uh, I tried to kind of hold a contest, that I would offer a prize if anybody got back to me after pre-ordering the book and could tell me which band and which album have a song with that title. Uh, and but of course, the way things work on the internet when you're promoting books, the more rules you slap on a giveaway, the less participation you get. So nobody's won the prize yet. But yeah, that is a heavy metal reference. Uh, and it is a story about Alyssa uh, my juggernaut of a heroine in the days well before she met Urzel.
Mm.
And it was an interesting exercise for me in that it kind of showed me how hard it would be to do an entire book from her point of view, as opposed to the way I have it written now, where Urzel is sort of, you know, or Urzel is sort of the Watson to Alyssa's homicidal Sherlock Holmes.
At times.
Yeah, but it was fun. It was fun to do it, and I'm glad Rudan gave me the opportunity. And it is also uh, it is also chock full in 6,000 words as opposed to 70,000 words of, as a reviewer once put it, magic, music, and violence. uh, so
Awesome. So, do you have a tentative release date for the sequel, or no? Not yet.
So the plan is for it to come out in 2026, but
Okay.
a lot that can be said, that has been announced. There's a lot more that kind of needs to happen.
Right.
Uh, Jennifer, the same artist, Jennifer Roboda Lesser, will be creating a cover for it, and obviously, so that needs to start, and edits need to happen, and they need to kind of figure out when it's going to fit into their schedule, because they have um, again, if there are writers listening to it, at the end of last year, Rudan opened to submissions and has actually acquired some novels beyond beyond what they're doing with myself and with Nick, and so they've got to kind of fit it into that schedule. Should they? I would advise everybody to kind of keep an eye on Rudan for when they next open to submissions, because tell you, as somebody who has been in this business for 30 some years,
Mm,
that working with them has been very refreshing
mm.
in some pretty great ways.
That's
Highly
wonderful.
highly recommend highly recommend that. Of course, also recommend buying their books so that they continue to have incentive to purchase more from authors. uh,
Yeah, that makes a big deal. I mean, a big
yeah,
difference.
yes, exactly. um
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a little less of that integrity in waves at times in the industry. So it's good to hear about
yeah,
that.
I think I got to a point where, um, again, this is in no way connected in any way to Rudon. I want to make that clear, but uh, Lucas, I know you can relate to this. It seemed like there were months on end, for those of us who participate in kind of the horror social media sphere,
Oh gosh. Yes.
where somebody getting bandied about as like, oh my god, this person did something horrible, stay away from them. And that would be like the first time I'd ever heard of the person.
Mm,
There was like just what seemed like just an endless series of that,
mhm.
and it was very kind of disappointing and alarming.
Yeah, but there's a little bit of a relief when you're like, "Oh, wait, I'm not living with that person," or like,
Right, right. I'm
"They aren't
I'm
publishing all my books."
right. I'm not someone who has that connection. Um, but and of course my empathies for those who do have those
Right.
issues, and it's not like I've not had them in the
Sure.
past. Some I have, it's still out there. I think it's in the Internet Archive. I have uh I have an essay I wrote about the origins of my first horror collection, Unseeming,
Hmm.
in which I tried to be careful, about not naming any names, making myself, memorable to, accusations of libel or whatever, but, in which I kind of told the story of how that book came to be, and it was really like pretty much it was to sum it up, it would be kind of like everything that could possibly go wrong, going wrong over
Mm.
over a span of years, and
Wow.
then suddenly everything clicked. And suddenly everything clicked, and it became, the closest thing I've had to a hit, so to speak. But man, what I had to go through to get there.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, you've been doing this a long time. You've seen it all. It comes in waves, and I'm glad you're the kind of person that persevered through those tough times to get that hit and to do all the great things. I mean, yeah, I was unaware until we spoke last time about your history of poetry and, award-winning
sure.
poet.
Yeah, that is a side of me that has been kind of set down,
Mm,
because not that I have anything against poetry. As I guess, as we mentioned in the previous round, I was at one time the president of the Science Fiction Poetry Association, and would really, I was really hardcore into promoting poetry with speculative fiction elements.
mm.
And there are people to this day who still know me from that, as opposed to what I do now as a writer of horror and dark fiction. Um, the and I like to think, gosh, I hope this doesn't sound, like I'm full of myself, but when you were speaking earlier, very, to me at least, very very movingly about, the prose,
Mm.
I like to think that is how that particular skill is now being employed,
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I could pick up on it. I mean, that's basically, where I can see that thread running through all of that, and it's one thing to be able to do it in fits and spurts throughout a novel, uh, which, I mean, more
Sure.
power to people that are able to, like, really dive into a section of the book and make it stand out. However, yours is consistent across the work. Like, you
Thank
have
you.
that prose, not just at moments. It's constant. Um, and it makes it so you have to, like, really. I was telling my wife, I can't believe I'm moving through this thing so quickly. And she said, "Why do you say that?" I said, "Because I'm actually chewing these words. Like,
Oh,
it's
gosh.
not a fast meal, like some of the stuff I read, and it's great stuff, is quick, fast, stark, brutal, like, and you're like, "Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god." This would I was moving quickly through this story, but also it was like chewing this really well developed, well thought through, very well assembled sequence of constant, well formed prose. It wasn't like you could shine and then you couldn't. Like, it was, to me, that's a demonstration of your time in the seat. I think it takes years to develop that type of voice, and you've done it.
Thank
So,
you. So I can share, like, one part of the secret sauce, I think, that,
yeah.
um and I think you and I actually kind of discussed this last time, assuming I'm not inventing a parallel,
Let's
conversation
let's do
universe,
it.
whatever. So one of my mentors, and, God rest his soul, he is no longer with us, a fellow named Bud Webster. And he was not a horror writer. He did write a couple of darker pieces
Mm,
in his lifetime, but, those who are familiar with his work would most likely be familiar with his humorous science fiction stories that appeared in Analog.
mm.
But he would often talk about how, before he ever sent anything anywhere, he would read it aloud to himself. Now, the twist, I have found, you know, every time I heard him say it, I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I have found that I just can't, because, like a couple pages in, I'm just, I'm a couple pages in, I'm just like, I'm so bored.
You're just a
I
machine.
don't, you know, I'm not enjoying doing this. I don't have the stamina to do this for 200 more pages. I mean, I like reading my work to an audience. I
Mm,
love doing readings, but reading to myself, it
mm,
just doesn't. Something does not. You know, some part of me just rejects that. But Harvard, I heard has a feature now. If you have like the right edition of Word, has a feature now where you can pick a narrative voice
yep.
and have the voice read to you. And I discovered that I can do that.
Oh, good.
Like I can stay engaged when Samantha is reading to me. and and so though I would like to think that I would like to think that, you know, sort of this the uh poetic prose quality is something that, you know, goes back before I started using this method.
Mhm.
I feel like that method upped my game, if that
Gotcha.
makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely changes the editing process. I do the same thing, the standalone out loud read. I also do the let me hear it, read it to me.
Yes.
Um, those are two of my final passes before I do, uh, my final edits after those two, and then I just sit down with it and read it in ebook format to get it off my laptop, and it's just
Sure.
something like a book like device or something, so I can read it in its natural habitat, if you will, once it's going
Sure.
to be in the wild. But yeah, I do the same thing. I had, and that's something that my mentor Honore Quarter taught me. She's like, when you have to say the words with your mouth, it changes. The flow of the words really is. It becomes
Sure.
apparent when you have to speak them.
Sure. If something is not if something doesn't flow in a natural way, you'll just trip on it like
Yeah, or if
instant.
you say the same word
Yeah.
twice in the same two sentences or too close in proximity, your ear picks it up.
Right.
Even though your eyes might not when you're just reading blind or not reading blind, when you're reading
I know
quietly.
what you mean. Yeah, yeah. I do know what you mean.
um, yeah, so I'm great. I'm glad to hear that you're a fan of that method as well. But it also makes me feel good that you're like, dude, I can't read out loud to myself that much because it is. I hate to say this, but every time I go to do it, I'm like,
Yes.
okay. I have to sit here. I have to literally sit or stand here and read this out loud to myself, all 68,000 words or whatever.
Right. It's an investment.
Yeah,
It's
it's an 8
not
hour
worth
run,
it.
baby.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
yeah.
And you want to hurry up and get it done, but you can't rush. The point of it is to take your time and hear everything. So it's a little trying. I do like the method where you have the word processor read to you, whether it's Word or whatever. But I find when I do that, I'm staring at the words as it's reading them, and
Right.
I'm looking for patterns and things. And sometimes I'm like, maybe I should just look at the ceiling and just listen.
I end up kinda doing that both ways. I actually, I first really discovered that method, uh, you know, when I was the editorial page editor for the Roanoke Times.
Hmm.
That was my final journalist job, and I was, you know, when you're in that job, when you're in that job when I was in that job, I was the voice of the paper. That is what an editorial writer does. You know, the unsigned the unsigned essay that is kind of the official, you know, opinion of the editorial board,
Hmm.
you know, the publisher. And in my case it was the publisher, the editor, and me. uh, and so I had um, I had to crank out when I wrote them. They usually ended up being about 1,000 words or so, and I had to crank out from like 3 to 5 of those a week.
Wow.
And um, for the first uh, in the beginning, in the beginning, newspapers on the whole have suffered pretty serious cuts in staff,
Mm.
and the same thing was certainly true with the company that owned the Roanoke Times. And so I would read these pieces when they were published and be sort of horrified at all the problems that got through. And so I realized that I needed to come up with a fast, quick, reliable way to to uh to to edit to that would show me, potential problems with diction or wrong words chosen or word flow or etc. You know, in a quick enough way that I could still stick to that schedule.
Mm.
And so that's when I started, kind of I started feeding these things as I wrote them into. I think I just found a site online that would read them to me, and so that's kind of where that habit started in earnest. Uh,
Gotcha.
yeah,
I was gonna say, if you read all the entire newspaper paper aloud to yourself, you'd be like like a historian of like.
that would be tough to do. I mean, that can be a lot of words, even in a relatively small
Oh my god, yeah.
newspaper. But yeah,
And you
that boy, that experience was a pretty serious trial by fire in terms
Mm.
of in terms of working to deadline. Uh,
Oof.
that and that job doesn't, that's a tangent. That job actually doesn't exist anymore at this point
Mm.
because of further cuts. But I left. I left and kind of flipped to the PR side before that job was done away with. So I dodged the guillotine, but I do feel like I learned a lot from that, and it's been great to kind of have the opportunity to kind of take that lesson and apply it to something much more fun to write. A
Yeah,
this dark fantasy horror novel.
absolutely. All right, so Mike, to kind of wrap it up, you have any
Sure.
recommendations? I'm catching you blind on this. I didn't give Mike any heads up that I was going to be asking for referrals or recommended reading. If you got a title that you've come across recently that just really grabbed you, or
Sure. So I do have some. Uh I'm My reading has kind of been, I'm not like kind of up on what's current
Mhm.
necessarily. That's both, because I've been working on my own novels, because I have a day job, and because, I do run, like you, Lucas, I run my own publishing company, and that has
Yeah,
its own that has its own kind of time consuming obligations. But
yeah.
but so books that I have read recently that left a pretty great impression. Um, Laird Barron's "Not a Speck of Light."
Oh, I can't wait to read that.
Yeah, his newest collection of novellas. First one in several years. I think the previous one was Swift to Chase, which came out I think before COVID.
Hmm.
So which feels before BC came out in BC. And that just had some brilliant work in it. Laird is, Laird does this kind of amazing job of kind of bringing in this sort of surreal, Lovecraftian ish, horror into these kind of hard boiled
Mm.
noir scenarios. It's something that he does better than just about anybody else. Um, but these stories are also, there's a lot of personal stuff. I think kind of they have that feel anyway. A lot of more personal elements worked in than
Mm.
maybe in his earlier work, which adds interesting emotional dimensions to it. I recently, for the first time, tried out the works of T. Kingfisher. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
that's the pseudonym of Ursula Vernon.
Right.
And I think she's a Hugo winner under both names. She's one of those people. Yeah. And so the books that I sampled, one that I was particularly impressed with is called The Hollow Places.
Mm.
And I don't think that's a new book. I think that's been out for a few years. But
Yeah.
what's fascinating about it, I mean, it's a fun story. I think her style. She's somebody who there's a kind of light heartedness to her approach to character, to her approach to at least some of the horror she describes, that is not something that I really do in my writing. There's
Mm.
not much lighthearted stuff in my
No
over.
comedic horror.
Yeah, yeah, a
Uh,
little bit, but not not a lot. But what the Hollow Places is actually, you don't need to know this to read it and appreciate it, but it's more or less a it's more or less a sequel to a classic story by Algernon Blackwood, The Willows.
hmm.
So uh, I got to the end of the book, appreciating a lot of what she did, and then she explains at the end that The Willows is the inspiration. And I went back and read The Willows. I'd read it before, but hardly remembered anything about it. I went back and reread The Willows, and and rereading The Willows made me appreciate what she had done in her book on a whole other level. Like,
Mm.
in terms of what happens in that, what happens in that, I think that would have come out. Yeah, I'm not sure if it was 19th century or early 20th century. I don't remember the exact. I you know, I don't remember the exact date, but it's an old story.
Mm.
But she grabbed a lot of stuff directly out of it and made it kind of fresh and interesting and scarier in some ways.
Ugh.
So yeah, it's great stuff.
Ugh.
Um, I decided, kind of like what I did a couple years ago, uh, after kind of, really sort of knowing who Shirley Jackson was for years and years and years without having read a lot of her work. I got the Library of America editions, collections of her novels and short stories, and read those. And I'm now someone who's read a lot of Shirley Jackson. Um, I did the same thing with Ramsey Campbell.
Mm.
He has, again, somebody who I've really only read just a handful of stuff by. But this is somebody who is a legend, in our field.
Right.
And I got the ebook edition of his World Fantasy Award winning collection, Alone with the Horrors,
Hmm.
which is a collection that spans, I think, like 4 decades of his career,
I have not read that.
just chock full of stories, and read that. And you know so he's somebody who started out when he was like a teenager. He got his first publications came when he was basically a kid,
Wow.
and he was doing these Lovecraft pastiches, and they're terrible. But obviously, they're I think August Derleth published his first collection with
It gives us some hope, though. It's
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah. And so the first few stories, I'm just kind of like, and then, but what was kind of brilliant about just having the book in chronological horror uh, is that his his writing career evolves right in front of you, and
mm,
and a few and after a few stories, I was like, okay, he's found his groove. There's this particular type of plot and situation that he seems to be drawn to, and we're repeating that, but and I appreciate that it's well done. And then a few stories later, he starts just blowing my doors off. Yeah. And he has, oh, there's a story, my favorite. It came fairly early on, but the book is just chock full of treasures. My favorite was a story called The Chimney,
Hmm.
in which he it I thought it was just a fascinatingly original thing to do. He takes basically the concept of Santa Claus, the supernatural entity that somehow comes down the chimney into everyone's house, and and transforms it into something really electrifyingly terrifying.
And what's the name of that story?
It's called The Chimney.
The Chimney.
Yes, and uh, you and I was kind of smirking when I at the start when I realized what the story was going to be about. And by the end, I was like, "Holy shit!" And I mean, it isn't like you might think. Of course, in there are plenty of movies about homicidal slasher Santa
Hmm.
Clauses or whatever.
Yeah.
This story this story is not that at
Hmm.
all. It's incredibly original. um,
Love
highly,
it.
highly recommended by Mike Allen.
I
Um,
love it. All right, we'll have to check those out because I haven't read that. And I do have a Kingfisher novella, which yeah, shame on me for waiting until this moment in time to pick it up. But I was at Barnes and Noble on one of my mornings where I would drop my son off at school, go to Barnes and Noble, drink a cup of coffee, and write for 2 hours, and they'll go pick him up.
noble practice.
Yeah, and I get to the register at the Starbucks inside the Barnes and Noble, and right next to the register is a stack of Kingfisher titles, and it says $5.
Wow,
And I'm like, I'll
that's a
take one.
bargain. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, what? I haven't checked this out, and I'm trying to remember which one it was. It's the one with the red cover.
So there's the other one I have is called A House with Good Bones.
Yeah, I
That
don't think it's that
I
one.
don't think it's that. She
Yeah,
seems to have a book come out every couple of months.
yeah, which is great.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so I've guiltily had this sitting on my
Sure.
bookshelf and have not
I
read it yet.
understand.
But I can't wait to because obviously she's doing good things. So I'm always excited to read authors that have a pretty substantial following because they're doing something right, usually.
Right,
So
right.
awesome. Well, thanks for the
Mostly.
recommendations, Mike.
Yeah,
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 mostly doing something right.
yeah.
So where can people follow you, find out more about you?
So, I am my company is Mythic Delirium Books, and if you
That's
can
it.
remember how to spell Mythic Delirium, that is my handle basically everywhere. I am Mythic Delirium on Blue Sky. I am Mythic Delirium on Threads. I am Mythic Delirium on Instagram. And I'm still Mythic Delirium on X. I'm still there. And the only my only social media account that cuts against that grain is Facebook,
Hmm.
where where I am Time Shark, which is a
Oh,
which is a reference to one of my poems from back in kind of when poetry was my main focus. I had a collection come out called Petting the Time Shark,
oh.
and the metaphor of the poem had to do with so so sharks, they don't have fish scales. They have these they have these kind of hooks,
Hmm.
and you can run your hand one way and it feels perfectly smooth,
Yeah,
and you can run the hand the other way and it will tear all the skin off your palm.
right.
And that's kind of the metaphor that I was playing with in that poem. And the poetry chapbook that came out all those years and years and years ago, the artist I worked with did this actually pretty great illustration of like a shark with like clocks for eyes, and there's a hand there's a hand running across it with like blood ballooning out into the water. I love it.
Nice.
I don't know if it exactly ever inspired anybody to buy it. But so I'm Time Shark on Facebook, but it's even easier to find me than that, because if you can remember Mythic Delirium, then you can go to mythicdelirium.com, which is maybe this isn't that easy, but if you can go to mythicdelirium.com, which is the website of my publishing company, where you find some of my books, mostly books that I've published by other people like Yukimi Ogawa or Theodore Goss or C.S.E. Cooney, et cetera, et cetera. And up at the top of that website is a Mike Allen's homepage link.
Hmm.
And if you click on that, you go to my actual homepage, which is Descent into Light, which is another reference to one of my poems. But at that page, you can see little, social media icons, and just click on one and find all these different places I just described. So,
Wild. You just
yeah.
took me on a journey just with the website. It's great.
Maybe I've made that too hard, but
Well, it
it's
comes full circle because all those you go through that chain and then it gives you links to all the Mythic Delirium social media sites.
right, right. From
It's great.
you have to leave it's like flatland. You have to kind of leave the plane and then come back down in another part of the plane through a third dimension.
We're riding the beam, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Mike, thank you so much for being a repeat offender on the show.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so much for
bringing,
letting me offend.
yeah, and thanks for introducing me to the Black Fire Concerto.
You're most welcome.
And you guys need to go check this out. I thought long and hard about this once I started reading it. I'm like, am I going to let my daughter read this? And at first I was like, no, she'll destroy this. She like eats paperbacks for a living. I don't know what she does when she opens a book. It automatically just starts to like get destroyed in her hands. And I'm like, I'm not letting her beat this thing up. It's great. I don't want her ruining this.
Maybe
So
she should get the ebook edition.
yeah,
Yeah.
so the book passed the "Do I want it to be destroyed after I read it?" test, and
Bless you.
my daughter's probably listening to this going, I don't do that. But yeah, I love the book, and I'm really excited to see it re-released. And I think great job on the cover by Jennifer Lesser, right?
Yes, Jennifer
And
Roboto Lesser. I asked her how to say it. Yeah.
thank you. And Todd Kiesling on the design, and Ruidon Books for putting out such a great second edition of the story, Mike. So thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
All right, guys, you know the deal. I'll see you next week in the next episode.